Let's call her Sam. All throughout high school and even for a bit afterwards, we were best friends. Even though we were best friends, I felt like I didn't really know her, if that makes sense. We were pretty wild teenagers, drinking, smoking, hanging out with older guys, ooh, I know, etc. Sam always dated super sketchy guys. When we were 16, Sam started dating a 27-year-old named John. Disgusting, I know. I had my fair share of dating guys way too old for me as well, though, so I didn't see anything wrong with it. Also, predators have a special way of making you feel like there's nothing wrong with what they're doing. I have my fair share of trauma due to older men from that time in my life, but that's a story for another time. She didn't have a car at the time, so she would regularly ask me to drop her off at his place to hang out and cover for her. If her mom contacted me, because this relationship was obviously hidden from her mom. Being an idiot teenager, I was like, yeah, sure, whatever, she's my homegirl and I know she'll do the same for me. Plus, I'd met John several times before and he seemed decent enough at the time. Please keep in mind that I was also a teenager at the time, and obviously I realized that he's a predator now. He would give us alcohol and stuff and would invite us over to party with his equally disgusting friends. Their relationship seemed fine at first, but it turned toxic within a few months. I mean, duh. He was a grown man manipulating a little girl. He would constantly demand to track her phone location and control what she wore. He also cheated on her multiple times, but she always stayed. During the time this happened, I stopped driving her to see him. One time she called me begging me to drive her to see him. I said no. She went on to explain that he was drunk, and if I wouldn't, then he would pick her up, and if they got in a crash due to drunk driving, it would be my fault. So I drove her to his house. I was furious with John at this point for hurting my best friend and had a rebellious teenage give no fucks attitude. So as soon as I walked into his house to drop Sam off, I started screaming at him for being a manipulative piece of shit. His response and the dark, twisted, yet emotionless look in his eyes still gives me chills to this day.
I could break your neck so easily.
Thankfully, I was standing right by the front door, so I ran out to my car and immediately sped off. The next couple of years are kind of fuzzy. Also, I asked Sam to stop talking to me about John because I was sick of hearing about him. But basically, they were constantly breaking up and getting back together. Sam dated a string of other guys, but would always cheat on them with John. When we were 18, this is when things started getting progressively weirder, and I started to distance myself from Sam because of it. Long story short, Sam had a new boyfriend who she seemed crazy about, and I was so relieved because she finally seemed over John. Then she heard through the grapevine that John got engaged, and she became irate. We were hanging out when she heard the news, and she was like, I just have to go home and process this, so she immediately left, and I was like, whatever. I'll give her her space. She calls me a few hours later and was talking super fast and laughing a lot. I was like, you good? She was like, yeah, I just broke into John's apartment and smashed all of his shit. I know that I have this new guy I'm dating, but I've been hooking up with John still. Don't hate me, and I'm sorry I didn't tell you. But anyway, I feel so great. I broke his TV and cut up all his sheets. Too bad John and his fiancée weren't home. I'd never seen her act like this before and was so alarmed. What would she have done if they were home? The break-in was never reported to the police because she told John it was her. And if he went to the police, John's fiancée likely would have found out that he was cheating on her with Sam. Now at this point, a smart person would completely cut her off. But I didn't. I stopped hanging out with her as much. And we naturally grew a bit distant because I had moved across the country for college. But we would text and FaceTime every couple of weeks. So at this point, you're probably thinking, okay, so what about the murder? Hang tight, we're almost there. In 2018, John's fiancée was found dead. The police immediately ruled it as a suicide because there was a note and the gun was found in her hand. But all of her friends and family insisted that she would never do that. I know this because I had a few mutual friends with his fiancée, and it was understandably all that anyone could talk about. She was known to everyone as being extremely positive and cheerful. They pressured the cops to investigate more, and lo and behold, 1 year later, John was found guilty of murdering her. Thanks for that, cops. He's currently in prison, and it chills me to the bone knowing that. I was in his house on multiple occasions and used to frequently hang out with him. So now moving on to why I think my friend may have had something to do with it. Last year she was visiting my city and asked to meet up for dinner. I was like, sure, why not? We're going to be in public, and I do miss her, and it'd be nice to catch up. While we were at dinner, she had her phone on the table, and I saw a call from the name Jail ringing into her phone. She quickly excused herself to take the call and was gone for a couple minutes. When she got back, I was like, WTF? She explained that she visits John in prison regularly, and they talk on the phone every day. I was like, why? He was found guilty of murder. Why would you want anything to do with him? And she looked me dead in the eyes with a look of pure evil and malice, and said, I'm the only one who knows what actually happened. Nobody else knows the truth. I quickly changed the subject and finished my dinner really quickly and made an excuse to leave. I was terrified at this point and had no idea what she was capable of. I hightailed it back to my apartment and blocked her on everything. I haven't spoken to her since. I know this isn't solid proof that she was involved, but her past behavior, the break-in, coupled with that chilling comment, and the fact that she regularly visited a convicted murderer in prison, leads me to believe she had something to do with it. At the very least, she knows much more than she's admitting. Sam, let's never fucking meet again. This entire situation still sits in the back of my mind, and I think it belongs here. When I was in middle school, I had an admirer. Josh wasn't exactly the kind of kid anyone knew too well, but he did have a few friends that he hung around with. I hadn't really flagged him down as anything more than an ordinary middle schooler like myself, only that he had a somewhat odd obsession with doodling tanks and weapons. But middle schoolers are middle schoolers, right? My friends had noticed the attention he gave me before I ever did. He had a photo of our class, which my friend once asked to see. He pointed at my face in particular and made a heart with his hands. She stared at him, laughed nervously, and left to tell me about it. Here are just a few of the red flags I tried to ignore. Number 1, the teacher ended up arranging the class so that Josh sat next to me near the back of the class. I had once caught him quickly closing a tab on his computer of something that I could only describe as a torture game, with a semi-realistic screaming person who you could interact with using different tools. Number 2, sitting next to him made things turn sour quickly. He began to say rude and degrading comments about me to my face. I remember groaning loudly in frustration and annoyance over some kind of math problem, to which he responded, I'd love to make you make a noise like that. I shuddered but did not speak up to anyone about it. Number 3, I bought a pair of steel-toed leather boots for my birthday. I wore them to school for the first time and he said, promise not to kick me with those. I said, don't give me a reason to, and I won't have to. He grinned, eerily replying, I make no promises. Number 4, graduation night came around. Everyone was dressed up by their parents in dresses and suits, and I was no exception. After the ceremony, our school had a graduation dinner and dance hosted in banquet hall after parents and guests left. My friends all sat together at a large table, and in classic female fashion, we went to the washroom as a group. After I stood up to leave with my friends, Josh stood up too. As we started to leave the hall, Josh lingered behind, slowly following us. I went into the women's washroom with my friends, only to see that there was a long lineup inside. So I told them I would wait out in the hallway, around the corner. Josh came walking down the hallway soon after, looking around. He walked right up to the women's washroom door, still looking around. He was about to open it when I walked out from around the corner and said, Hey, what are you doing?
Queen of Marine? Why are you out here?
I'm waiting. What are you here for?
I'm going to the bathroom.
There's a line inside. That's the women's bathroom. As I pointed to the door he was in front of, clearly labeled with a sign, he stepped away from it now. Stepped far away from the door, to the point where he was pressed against the wall opposite the washroom. I do not think I will ever forget what he said to me then. He smiled at me, fully grinning now, and said quietly,
I'll pay you not to tell.
I didn't know how to respond to that. His voice was filled with malice, and something about the situation felt very, very wrong. I backed away, declining whatever number of bills he had already pulled out from his pocket. He quickly turned around and went back into the hall. He didn't even go into the men's washroom, despite having said that he was there to use it. For quite some time the thoughts plagued me. What if I had been inside the women's bathroom and no one was around? Why was he out there? Why did he offer to pay me? I later recalled that he had been suspended from school after a situation occurred between him and another female student. But this had happened before I transferred to this school, and I don't know the complete details. I don't know where Josh is now or if this behavior has escalated. I've tried to rationalize his behavior for years, but I still strongly believe that this was no ordinary middle school crush. So Josh, let's never meet again. I still wear my steel-toed boots all the time. This happened when I was a sophomore in high school. I used to take private bus to school and back. However, when it came to dropping me off home, I was always the last one because I lived a little bit outside of my school district. My bus driver couldn't drop me off after dropping everyone in my school off because she had to pick up the elementary school kids. As a high schooler, we left school much earlier. So I either had to wait for her to drop every elementary school kid off, or I could just walk home from the elementary school. That school was fairly close to my house. It was only about a 10-minute walking distance. I would walk home every day from that stop. On one particular day, I got off the bus that would park behind the school's field in the back and started walking towards this adjacent parking lot. The school is located in front of a very busy street that was connected to the highway, and in front of the school there was a mall. I always wore headphones to avoid the noise of the busy street while I was walking home. When I got to the other parking lot, a small white car had pulled up, and the guy inside it started calling out to me. I usually ignore everyone that tries to talk to me when I'm walking home, but I accidentally made eye contact, so I decided to see what he wanted. I didn't notice it then, but looking back, the man was acting very strange. He was sort of jumpy and sweaty. His car was old and he had a mess inside. In his passenger seat was a woman who looked annoyed or angry. I assumed they were just hot because it was nearly 90 degrees outside. He was asking me if I knew where the mall was. Now, the mall's across the street, but there were a few shops independent of it that you had to go around. It's still visible to the naked eye, though. I told him, yeah, just go straight from behind the school, make a right, cross the busy street, then make a right at the mall. He was acting like he didn't understand what I was saying and asked if I knew Spanish, so I explained in Spanish. Again, he pretended he didn't understand, so he asked if I could get inside his car and take him to the mall. Then he would drop me off at home. In my stupid mind at the time, all I thought was, this guy is really annoying because you can literally see the mall from here. I also was thinking that maybe I should take the ride home since I really didn't want to walk home in the heat. However, something inside of me was telling, no, don't get into this man's car. He kept trying to convince me, and the more he talked, the more nervous he got. Behind me, there was another car stationed next to a tree. Sometimes parents would wait for their kids a couple minutes before school was over. There was a woman in the car with her window down, just glaring at the guy. The guy kept looking behind me and at her. After rejecting him politely for the millionth time, he finally said, okay, thank you, and sped off. I thought, what a weird guy, and that maybe he's not from here, which is why streets are confusing to him. The lady behind me said,
Be careful who you talk to.
I looked and awkwardly smiled and said, yes, thanks. On my way home, all I felt was annoyance. At the guy for interrupting me while I was walking home, and the lady for talking to me as if I didn't know about stranger danger. Years later, after listening to other people's let's not meet stories, I realized that that man was trying to kidnap me. He was trying to get me inside his car, and the lady behind me staring at him was making him very nervous. The passenger woman was probably there to get kids' confidence, but she was probably annoyed that she had to be there. Maybe she didn't want to be there. I don't know. It honestly gives me chills to think they went to a school to try to pick up children. I wonder who else they tried talking to. There's parents and security around, which is why I didn't see him as a threat at first. But if it weren't for my gut feeling, I could have easily gotten in his car and disappeared. Also, that lady's presence really scared him off. Creepy, sweaty guy trying to pick up kids. Let's not meet again. Hi, this is the first time I've ever posted here, and it's really the only time anything creepy has happened to me. At the time of this story, I was 17 years old and had just graduated high school. I was one of the youngest in my class due to my birthday being in late summer. Anyways, it's about the middle of June and I've got nothing to do. Skype was really popular at this time, so I had added some school friends along with some teachers who were all pretty cool. Our school policy doesn't allow students and teachers to be connected on social media, so once I graduated, it was all okay. One of the teachers I added wasn't really a teacher but a teacher's assistant. He was relatively new to the school, had only been there about 2 years, long enough that everyone trusted him. One day, as I'm chatting up a few people, he sends me a message telling me that our drama club was going to have a sort of graduation party out at a lake nearby. He told me that a bunch of people I knew along with some members of his family would be there. As I said previously, I was 17, very naive, so I agreed to go. It sounded like fun, and I didn't have any other plans. Unfortunately, my family's pretty poor, so we didn't have the gas money to drive to the lake. So, like an idiot, I let Mr. Mary pick me up. Not even 10 minutes down the road, he turns to me and says,
"You're 18, right?"
I answered that no, my birthday wasn't for another few weeks. He sorta looked forward and stayed quiet, but kept driving. It weirded me out a little bit, but I figured what could go wrong, the others will be there waiting for me. So, half an hour later, we pull up to the lake in a very secluded part. I start feeling weird and notice that we're literally the only people around. He grabs my fucking hand and starts walking towards a little lakeside restaurant where he orders us some food. The entire time he's rubbing my arm or my back, trying to hold my hand, pushing hair out of my face, and I am fucking terrified. I had the bright idea to ask a restaurant worker where the restroom was because for some reason I didn't think to let them know what was happening. I walk outside and lock myself in the restroom while frantically trying to get a hold of someone, anyone. But I had no cell phone service, not even a hint. So I'm freaking out almost in tears when I manage to get one tiny bar of service and text my stepmother. She really saved my life that day. Mr. Mary and I walked back out to his car, and once inside, luckily with a little better service, my stepmother calls me and makes a huge scene about a bad emergency happening and needing me home right then. Luckily, this must have scared him because he drove me back home where he was met with my very, very pissed set of parents. My dad and my stepmom reported him to both the cops and to the school system, but nothing was ever done about it. I'm not sure if he's still part of the school or not. All I know is he sent me a friend request on Facebook a couple years back, and I promptly blocked him. So, Mr. Mary, let's not meet ever again. When I started 7th grade, I started hanging out with the meanest kids in the school. All my childhood friends changed when we entered middle school. Cliques began to form. And suddenly, the kids I knew since kindergarten didn't want to be my friend anymore. So I took up with the bad kids. There was a whole clan of them, and half of them were family. The ones who were related all lived in what we called a holler, though I now call it the rattlesnake den when or if I drive past it. Holler folk are not to be trusted, and if you're from a small rural area, you know what I'm talking about. These kids were ranging in age from 9th to 12th grade. They were always in trouble, getting suspended, getting detention, defying authority, and they just looked like a bunch of punks. I had always been a good kid, but a lot of things changed in this era for me. My mom married a human-shaped leech around the same time who was both verbally and emotionally abusive to me. My brother and sister were estranged by that point because of said leech. My mom didn't ever seem to have time for me and my problems anymore. She was always a single parent up until this point in my life, but honestly not a good one, so taking up with a bunch of angry kids made me feel better. And soon I started doing really bad things too. One of the holler kids in this family was my age, and she and I became best frenemies, so to escape my reality, I tried to spend as much time at her house as I possibly could. I hated it. Those people lived like animals, but it was better than going home. As a side note, there are other terrifying experiences from this same time period, like the time her grandmother held me hostage for 3 days when I was about 13, but I digress. Her older cousins, specifically the one we all called P-Bob, would often bounce around the holler from house to house, probably out of boredom. P-Bob was about 17 or maybe even 18 at the time, and it seemed that once he found out I was spending a lot of time at her house, he came around more and more. I can recall one specific time when I first realized I was afraid of this guy. Frenemy and I were camping in the yard. Our camping trip basically consisted of us setting up an old, worn-out tent off to the side of their Dust Bowl property, taking a radio and some off-brand pop, and staying in the tent until it got too cold at around 3 or 4 a.m. Pretty much that bitch left me out there by myself that night, but that's neither here nor there. Probably at around 10 or 11 that night, P-Bob and another cousin snuck up on our tent and scared us. P-Bob was a big boy. He was fat, but he also lifted weights. I remember he had a head like a bull, and he always had the most condescending look on his face. Some of the other boys, all of which were older, were actually really nice, and I really considered them my friends. Spoiler, they weren't really my friend, but we'll get there. P-Bob, however, was always aloof. He was never not a smartass unless he was raging about something. Sometimes when I'd be at my friend's house, I could hear him in his mom's house next door screaming his guts out at her. He had a little sister who he was unabashedly abusive of. I even once saw him slap her, no holds barred, full-on hard slap. She was probably 8 or 9, maybe younger. He was also sexually abusive of her, but that's not my story to tell. I remember being afraid to get out of the tent that night while P-Bob was there, like that old thing was really going to protect me in any way. He was being sexually derogative, if there's a such thing. He was badgering me, but doing it in a way that made it come across as just him being comedic. He said something to me about going to another one of the cousins' house and having sex with me on a kitchen counter, though his version of this statement was far more colorful and terrifying. I had no idea how to react. So I caught an attitude with him and started trying to berate him right back, even going so far as to threaten him. I was completely full of shit, but I was an angry child and had no idea how else to handle the situation. To skip ahead, there were dozens of other awful encounters with him over the next year or so. He grabbed me one day at school and tried to throw me down a flight of concrete stairs, all the while trying to sneak a feel of various parts of my body. When I said something about it to Frenemy, she belittled me and told me I was fucking retarded and that he was only being funny. She was a very cruel and hateful person. They all were, really. By 8th grade, these friends had really changed me as a person, and not for the better. Through me, P-Bob was introduced to a girl whom I frequently argued and spatted with named Lorelei. She was a cocky transfer from the hood in Ohio, and she and I hated each other immediately, so we fought often but never physical. Long story short, she met P-Bob because of one of our arguments, and the two of them started dating. Toward the end of the school year, they broke up. I was oblivious to this, as the only conversations I ever had with this girl were limited to giving her shit and her giving it right back. Until one day she made a comment about me causing her and P-Bob to break up. I most certainly had nothing to do with that, but I felt she was an imbecile, so I laughed it off. The end of the school day came, and we all loaded on the bus. By this point, I had made a new friend, whom was also friends with the Bad Holler kids, Tasha, and she was coming to my house for the weekend. We sat down near the back of the bus and waited to leave. I noticed when P-Bob got on the bus, he immediately locked his eyes on me and commenced to giving me the dirtiest look I've ever seen. If looks could kill, right? He sat down in the seat behind me and Tasha. The bus finally took off, and we made it out Route 7 and almost to Doctor's Branch Road. So about 3 to 5 miles before he really started badgering me. I don't remember everything he said, but for many years I did. In fact, for years following this event, I'd hear his words on a loop and experience the attack over and over in my mind. It took a long time to stop thinking about it, so honestly I'm glad I don't remember it all anymore. but he was saying a lot of horrific stuff. I mean, awful stuff to me. Sick stuff, threats. I was terrified, but I was more so humiliated. He also said something about me breaking him and Lorelei up, and that I called him a player. I had never heard that word before that day. All my bad kid friends were laughing at me. Tasha was too. This is one of the few times in my life where I truly lost my ability to speak. So I sat there without saying a word, and just occasionally glanced at him to gauge the emotion on his face. He had now switched seats, and was across from us. We were about another 6 miles from my drop-off when he leaned over to Tasha and told her to move back to another seat, which she did without hesitation, and he jumped in the seat with me. He continued attacking me, so I put my face against the bus window and tried to scoot as far into the corner as I could. I guess my refusal to pay attention to him could be what escalated the situation. But the next thing I know, he's got my head in a vice grip with his arms, and he's simultaneously strangling me and crushing my face. Keep in mind, I was an 8th grader. This guy was supposed to have graduated like a year or two prior, so legally he was an adult. The school bus driver did nothing to stop P-Bob, to which he would later defend by saying that us kids on the back were always doing that kind of stuff, and he didn't think it was anything out of the ordinary. I hesitate to even tell you that my bus driver was also the father of 2 of the Holler Kid boys, and the freaking sheriff of our town. So there I am, unable to breathe or scream, but still trying. I slapped, punched, clawed, but he kept squeezing my head. It felt as if my cheekbones were collapsing. I don't remember how long this went on because things got blurry after this. It was still fresh in my mind, days later. I do remember he eventually let go of me and then hit me a few times and then tried to strangle me again, and I remember at some point seeing everyone laughing at me. But like I said, it's blurry. The next thing I remember was standing by the front seats of the bus waiting for it to come to a complete stop and trying with everything in me to hold back tears. When I got off the bus, I ran straight into the house and to the bathroom to hide. I didn't want my mom to see me, and I needed a moment to gather myself, but the tears were pouring by then, and I couldn't make them stop. My face looked bad, but it got worse over the next few days, as bruises tend to get darker as they heal. When I didn't come out of the bathroom for a while, my mom came to the door and asked what I was doing. Tasha, who was standing outside the door, I believe, in an attempt to draw my mom's attention and force me to tell, started crying and spilled the beans. Yeah, I'm rolling my eyes on this one. Still to this day. My mom forced me to come out of the bathroom. My screaming ninny stepdad got involved. The police were called, and I had to pose for what felt like an eternity of police evidence photos. My face looked like it had been put in the washing machine with a bunch of sneakers. My throat was bruised. I was scratched up a little. It was a mess. So there's actually a little more to this story, but I'm going to stop there because I've taken up enough of your time. P-Bob went to jail over this, but I actually had no idea that he did until I was in my earlier mid-20s. I never rode the school bus again for the rest of my years at that school, and I rarely ever saw P-Bob in the years after high school, until he sent me a friend request on Facebook in 2017. Yeah. Kids, birds of a feather flock together. People like these are never your friend. Don't put yourself in the position I did because things could have been much worse. I would say let's not meet P-Bob, but he died a year or so ago. I would say I feel sympathy for him or his family, but I don't. Warning, light blood. So I randomly found this subreddit, and after reading the first few top posts of all time, I instantly knew what story I should post here. As the title suggests, I was on a school trip. It was senior year, and our high school has a senior trip every year. Other schools have these too, I'm sure. My whole class, a whopping 23 students, started fundraising at the start of 8th grade year. Living in a remote town in Northern California, we decided as a class to go down to LA for a week. We decided to go see Venice Beach, Universal Studios, and other such LA attractions. We stayed in a hostel right on Venice Beach. We got 2 rooms to ourselves, a boys' room and a girls' room. I got to stay in the girls' room, because all the beds were taken in the boys' room. Me being the 275-pound, 6 feet tall motherfucker I am. Whenever anyone wanted to go out to walk around, I would walk with them, because I am polite. This is where things take a bad turn. One of the girls wanted to go out, so she asked me to come along. I agreed and went with her. Walking down the sidewalk next to the beach, her phone rang. It was her other friend wanting to chat, so she went to go talk to her. I sat down on a bench while she talked. I could still see her, of course, but she was far enough to be out of earshot. There are few people around because it's Los Angeles, and there are always people around. There was a man stumbling about. Tattoos out the ass, probably. I've nothing against tattoos, trust me, I'm just describing him. He was scrawny and tall. He started yelling about how just because someone is in a club, that doesn't mean someone has a bigger dick. I was very confused and sure I was missing most of the story. He walked towards a couple that were at a table and they said something and he walked away from them, towards me. I instantly tensed up because I have had almost zero fighting experience and was not ready to deal with a then-thought drunk guy. He locked eyes with me, walked up to me, turned so that he was perpendicular to the way I was facing, and pulled out a knife. I froze. It wasn't really a knife. It was one of those X-Acto knives used in art and shit. I don't know what they're used for. I did not care about the type of blade, just very aware that it would hurt if jammed into my neck. The girl was walking back by this time and saw him pull the knife. I looked at her and she started to walk towards the hostel, which was no more than 2 minutes away. He then proceeds to hold out his arm. This is when I noticed the track marks on his arm. He was a junkie. I instantly started thinking about what my final words should be. But instead of saying anything to me, he looks down at his hand. He starts mumbling about something I was too freaked out to worry about. The semantics of a heroin ramble. He takes the knife and starts cutting the top of his hand. I can see the blood pour out of the first slice. My heart is no longer felt anywhere on my person. I stop breathing. My brain remembers that I do, in fact, have working legs. I get up and walk away toward the hostel. I get to the front door, and there is the girl on her way down with the chaperones. They stop me and ask if I'm okay. I tell them what happened, and that I wasn't hurt and everything is okay. I go up to the boys' room to hang out, and I recount the story. They're all stoned and are talking about getting a pizza. I figure a pizza sounds good, so I order a pizza. The pizza was in fact good. Hey all, I'm pretty new to Reddit, so forgive me if there's a more appropriate subreddit for this story. I've been listening to r/compilations on YouTube while drawing lately. One just came up about stalkers, and it pushed me over the edge to write out one of a few stories I've been thinking about sharing here for a while now. First off, this story happened almost 10 years ago. I'll jump right in because it's long. I got home from work one day and logged into Facebook to find a message from someone I didn't know. It was too long ago to remember verbatim what was said, but it was along the lines of, "Hey Lot Lizard, I know you have no idea who I am, but I've been trying to decide what to do for a few days and figured I had to let you know what's been going on. Someone has been catfishing me using your identity for over 2 years, and I just found out about it last week." The sender of the email was clearly pretty shaken up and understandably was experiencing a mix of emotions. According to her, she had met the imposter online a little over 2 years prior to her writing this, and that they had been engaged in a pretty intimate, long-distance relationship for a majority of that time. The imposter had created a Facebook and had over time reposted almost all of my photos with their own captions to them. Including a good amount of art I'd drawn that they took credit for. They created fake profiles for a good amount of my close family and friends, so they could comment on the photos of themselves to make the profiles seem legit. The funniest part to me is that although most things in my real life seemed to be mirrored in this fake profile, I, straight male, was instead portrayed as trans. I think the main reason for this was that the sender of the email and the imposter would actually speak on the phone, and imposter turned out to be female in the end, and therefore needed a reason to justify her more feminine-sounding voice. The sender of the email was justifiably both angry and creeped out and wanted to find the catfish. She started asking me a lot of questions about my life, but phrasing them like, "Is your sister's name blank? And did you go to blank high school?" Some of them were clearly information that anyone could glean from a quick browse of my profile. But then she asked, "Is your best friend blank?" Which struck me as odd, since despite this person actually being my closest friend, and who I spend the most time with, we have barely any Facebook photos together, and most are from a long time ago. Then she asked, "Were you adopted, and are your half-siblings' names blank and blank?" Which sealed the deal for me, since I knew for a fact I'd never posted about being adopted online. The sender of the email already had an idea that this person had known me in real life, but this confirmed it for me. The sender of the email had contacted me shortly after confronting the imposter for the first time. I guess after 2 years, they'd finally become suspicious of the fact that imposter wouldn't show their face. I have no idea how it took this long for them to figure that they were being played, but I'm glad they finally decided to give the ultimatum of show your face, or I'm cutting you off. I'm pretty sure this is the point where the imposter admitted to being a catfish, and that she'd been using the identity of someone she had a crush on in high school before hanging up. I was given the URL so I could look through the profile myself, which was up for about 2 days after I saw it before it was all removed. It was definitely really bizarre. The imposter had posted more than I ever had on Facebook, and it genuinely seemed like they'd lived a pretty involved double life online as me. Almost everyone I'd posted photos with on my real profile would then have their own fake profiles created that had enough content to be genuinely convincing so they could be tagged in and validate these new photos. Some of these profiles seem to have gone and made their own real friends as well, and I wondered if any of those were used to facilitate even more online dating deception. Either way, the amount of time that this person had spent fabricating their alter ego's online presence was pretty shocking. The whole time I'd been crawling down this Facebook rabbit hole, the sender of the email was looking through my real profile. After a while, she sent me a message saying, "Did you take these photographs?" and showed me what I remember as a black and white photos of a barn or something. I hadn't, which was weird since everything else on the fake profile originated with me, and she'd noticed the discrepancy. We both tried reverse image searching with no luck. Then, either through a stroke of genius or somewhat suspiciously, I really couldn't tell, she thought to flip the fake number imposter had written into the fake FB profile around in reverse, and a Google search came up with a landline that belonged to the home address of a girl that I'd gone to high school with. Real me was Facebook friends with real imposter's profile, so we both went snooping around and found the photo that she'd claimed I'd taken, which pretty much confirmed to me that this was the imposter. I'm pretty sure there were more indicators to the sender as well, but I can't remember. I thought about messaging her for a while, but decided that it probably wouldn't lead to anything good. At the time, my thoughts were definitely let's not meet. I talked a few times with the sender of the email just to try and decompress a bit, but honestly just wanted to distance myself from the situation and also had my suspicions about the sender as well. I figured maybe it was imposter's one last-ditch effort to try and talk to me. Although when it was all over, the sender seemed to be eager to leave this all behind as well, so maybe not. Either way, it was a really strange experience. I felt mostly freaked out and violated, but I guess there was a small part of me that was flattered by it. I had a lot of mixed emotions. The weirdest part to me is I'm a really approachable person and would have definitely been willing to talk and probably be friends if this person had just approached me instead. Although I'm still not sure if this was done out of an obsession for me or if this person felt like I was just a suitable image to base this fabricated persona off of. I remember talking to her probably twice throughout high school and really didn't have a very good idea of who she was other than a quiet hipster girl. If either person involved reads this, I'd definitely be happy to talk now. It's been years, but I've gone from being very put off to always wondered why this person chose me over a myriad of other more attractive or interesting people online to base their other life off of. According to the sender who contacted me, She'd probably spent more time online pretending to be me than she actually did going about her own life. I have a tumultuous history of addiction and have had plenty of my own escapes, which is why it's always fascinated me that someone would want to pretend to live someone else's life as a means of doing that. Because at the end of the day, the person pretending to be me had no idea that I spent my time daydreaming of being a different person as well. I guess it just goes to show that no matter how much you wish you were someone else, chances are that person has plenty of their own reasons to want to escape their own demons for their own reasons. Thanks for reading. Update-ish. For anyone still interested, I recently spoke to a good friend who told me that while they don't know the perpetrator personally, they do know they identify as non-binary now, which to me sort of confirms my suspected motive, which was to explore their sexuality through another identity to one degree or another. But I'll probably never know for sure. This story happened in Ohio in the 80s. I was a teenager long before cell phones existed, living with my parents near Columbus. I don't know when the first time he saw me was, but the first time I saw him was through our kitchen window. We had a pop-out greenhouse window, and it was late at night. I was getting a glass of water. All the lights were off, and I happened to look outside and saw a figure of a man outside of the window. I froze and just went back into my room because I was so scared, acting like nothing had happened. It may seem crazy I didn't do more, but this was not the first time that I felt someone was watching me. For weeks before that, I knew someone was outside of my bedroom window. We lived in a one-story house that backed up to the park, so anyone could go past the back of my house to the main street. It wasn't unusual for people to be around. For weeks late at the night, I would wake up with the strongest sense of someone watching me. It was summer, so the window was open, but I had blinds blocking my view from the outside and a screen to keep out bugs. After a few times of waking up like this, I started to hear someone touching the screen, like running their fingernails across the mesh. This happened 2 or 3 times a week, and sometimes I would get the courage to run to my parents' room. But by the time we went back, he was never there. They didn't really believe me either. This became an almost nightly thing, and I knew I wasn't imagining it. So when I saw him outside the window, it was almost a relief because I saw he was real and I wasn't imagining it. This went on for months until finally it started to snow, and then there were footprints visible outside my window. So my parents at least acknowledged he was real, but didn't really do much. Remember, this was the 80s. Then it all came to a head when I was home alone with a couple of friends getting ready to go out. My parents were away at a dinner, so we had the house to ourselves. The blinds were up on one of the bedroom windows, and as I turned around there, he was standing directly in the window staring at us. He was a scary-looking guy with bright orange-dyed hair. This time I screamed along with my friends. We ran into the bathroom, which didn't have any outside windows, and I finally got up the courage to run to the kitchen to call 911. The police came at about the same time my parents got home, but there was no sign of the guy. The police basically accused my friends and I of drinking and making the whole thing up. A few weeks later, I happened to see a newspaper and stopped dead in my tracks. There was a picture of the guy on the front page. He had attacked 2 girls in a gas station and ended up killing them. The police had shot and killed him when they were trying to detain him. Honestly, I can't remember all the details and haven't been able to find the article since. I remember feeling shocked and relieved that he wasn't coming back. So guy with the dyed orange hair, let's not meet. This is a story I have wanted to tell for a long time. Yes, it is very long. It is as long as it needs to be to say what I need to say. I included a telder at the bottom. This took place between 1995 and 2002. Everyone has had a bad friend or two. I had an epically bad friend. If it hadn't happened to me, I would never have known that this strange mental disorder was real or that people could behave this way. Outside of Lifetime Channel movies, I grew up in northern Indiana. I went to a large high school in the mid-90s, and my senior year I met another student named Hannah, who had recently transferred from the main local Catholic high school in the area. That was unusual to transition so late from private to public school. Hannah said she had been expelled because of a fight with another student over some drama about a boy. She said the other girl had made allegations against her and accused her of attacking her. Whatever had happened, the police had been contacted and she had restraining order placed on her by the other girl. It had forced her expulsion, and that was how I came to meet her. Hannah said none of it was true. She said she'd never tried to hurt her. Later, I went to college in Indiana. She went to college in Florida. One day, a friend of mine from the dorms ran into a guy she had known from Catholic school back in my hometown. Once he left, she told me about this incident that had happened to him where these two girls were fighting over him, about which one was his girlfriend. Neither one of them was dating him, and yet both of these girls thought that they were in a secret relationship with him. The whole thing had been very strange. Then she said one of them was a girl named Hannah. The next summer I was back in my hometown and Hannah was also. I hung out with her casually. I told her what I had heard about her. She said she would tell me what really happened. She had a crush on this boy, but she had seen him talk to another student named Julie and she became jealous. She said she was convinced that this boy Mike wanted to be her boyfriend. She was sure Julie must have said something bad about her. Hannah said Julie was popular and pretty and a cheerleader and she hated everything about her, so she decided she would try to see if she could push her to an alive herself. Hannah said it hadn't worked, but that she had a nervous breakdown. I asked her what she had done. We went back to Hannah's house. Up in her bedroom, she pulled something out from the back of her closet. It was a set of books. One was a book on how to use dirty tricks to get revenge on people, and one was a book with a cartoon character on the front pulling their hair out, and it said in big letters, gaslighting. I know it's a common phrase now, but back in 1995 I had never heard of it. I asked Hannah what the book was about, and she said it was about how to drive someone crazy. She said it was simple. You just make them believe things aren't really true, or that things they think are real never happened. She told me what she really did to Julie a couple years back in high school. She had pretended to be friends with her. She got her phone number and then she had started making these anonymous phone calls to her. This would have been way before cell phones were common. She had a friend from her church who had a crush on her and she would trade sexual favors with him in exchange for him pretending to be Mike on the phone. He would get a blowjob for every time he did this for Hannah. Fake Mike would tell Julie not to talk in school so that they could keep things private. Hannah would put notes in her locker and sign Mike's name to them. Fake Mike would make plans to meet Julie at the mall or the movies and then never show up. It sounds very stupid, but they would have been 14 or 15-year-old girls when this happened. Hannah said she had done something really embarrassing, but that it had worked. She had a mixtape and she would whisper nasty little phrases like, "You want to die or you should kill yourself," between songs, and had played it in her bedroom when Julie was over. Obviously, she commented on it, and Hannah sat there with a straight face and said she didn't hear anything and had no idea what she was talking about. She had set it up with her brother earlier and had asked him to help her play a prank on her friend. He came into her bedroom and said he couldn't hear anything and turned around and told Julie that she must be crazy and hearing things. Julie's parents decided to confront this boy and his family about his behavior towards their daughter. He had no idea what was going on, because her parents had confronted this boy about something he was never doing. Julie had been publicly humiliated at her high school, and everyone was talking about how she was crazy. Hannah loved every bit of it, until Julie's parents got their phone bill and decided to give it a good look. Mike had not been calling their house, but somebody had been. They had numerous anonymous phone calls. They checked it out and found out they were all coming from Hannah's home phone number. Julie confronted Hannah about it at school, and that was when something violent happened between the two of them in the stairwell. Julie said Hannah had started screaming at her that Mike was her secret boyfriend. Hannah was very angry about that. She said Julie made that part up to try to get back at her and embarrass her for what she had done. She said Julie was exaggerating about what happened in the stairwell, and it had been an accident. She said she'd never tried to push her over the railing. She had merely bumped into her. Hannah wasn't embarrassed about it. She was proud of it. The only thing that upset her was that she had been caught. but she said that most of the people at her Catholic school still thought that Julie was crazy, so she considered it something of a victory. Hannah didn't have anything to say in her defense, just that when she liked a boy, she would do anything to be with them. That summer, Hannah started dating a guy named Derek. Every time I saw her, she told me tales about their wild and crazy sex life and how much he was in love with her. Hannah said it was a secret affair and they were sneaking around behind his girlfriend's back. We saw him once at a party and he screamed at Hannah to stay away from him and leave him and his girl alone. Someone had been making strange anonymous phone calls to him and his girlfriend. He paid to have the number traced back and found out it was Hannah. Hannah admitted that she had been trying to break them up, but he was taking too long to do it himself, but that she had overplayed it. And now he was angry and had broken things off with her. She was depressed after Derek, so I took her out to a bar. Hannah started flirting with this much older guy in his 40s who was sitting by himself. She had recently purchased a cell phone. This would have been in '96 or '97, when they were still kind of new and novel. The next thing I knew, she has this phone out, and I thought she was giving this old guy her phone number. Instead, he asked her what she wanted him to say. She typed a phone number and handed the guy her phone, and he made disgusting comments to whoever answered about how he was having sex with this guy's girlfriend and commenting on what a whore she was. He hung up and started laughing and handed the phone back to Hannah. Hannah gave him a $20 bill and said the girl was a bitch and deserved it for stealing her boyfriend. She was paying complete strangers to anonymously call people she hated on her cell phone and recite some prearranged script to spread rumors about them. I ran into a mutual friend later in the summer and mentioned that Derek had broken things off with Hannah. She gave me a very funny look and said that maybe there had never been any relationship to break off. A year later, we were both temporarily living back with our parents and sort of adrift. Hannah had been kicked out of her dorm over an accusation made by another student and never completed her degree. She had started hanging out with some old friends from high school. One of those former high school friends was a young woman named Kelly, who Hannah had been pretty good friends with. Something had happened between the two of them because Hannah went on and on about how much she hated her. It had something to do with Kelly's new boyfriend, Dan. Hannah insisted she was using him in some bizarre plot to make another man jealous and was worried that she would hurt him because she had found out about an STD that she had. I drove by her house one night and there were 2 police cars out front. I went home and called her and she said she couldn't talk. I went over and saw her the next day. I thought that their house had been robbed or something. No, the police had been there to talk to her about an incident that had been reported. Hannah was upset. She said that she had to tell the police that she had smoked weed and had gotten high because Kelly had made an accusation against her. Hannah said it was an accident and a misunderstanding. Hannah swore she hadn't been trying to hurt her. The day after Hannah told me about how much she hated Kelly, apparently she had called her up and said she wanted to talk to her about something. She and another friend had shown up and the 3 of them had gone out to some local overlook to smoke a joint. The other girl waited down below for the 2 of them to talk privately. Hannah had asked Kelly to look at something, and when she turned her back, Kelly said Hannah grabbed her and tried to push her off the ledge. They were about 100 feet up in the air, and she would most likely have been killed by the fall. Kelly said they fought back and forth. She regained her balance and had took off screaming about what Hannah had tried to do. Hannah said it was all a misunderstanding. It was an accident. She had been trying to show her something, but then she had lost her balance because she was high from the marijuana, and had grabbed Kelly to stabilize herself, not push her off the edge. She said Kelly had almost fallen off because she had hysterically overreacted. Kelly had been very upset and insisted that Hannah had done it on purpose, and she said that it was because she was jealous over her relationship with Dan. She said it was obvious to everyone that Hannah was obsessed with him. What Kelly had not done, however, was tell the police that they had smoked a joint right before this happened, and when Hannah did, the police said that didn't have enough evidence for any kind of case. They weren't happy with Kelly for omitting that part of the account. That was it for Hannah and most of her high school friends, or at least for a couple of years. Kelly stuck to her version of what happened, and her friends sided with her. People began talking about the strange rumors that had followed Hannah around since high school. I thought it was suspicious, but I couldn't bring myself to believe that she tried to kill another woman. I thought that sort of thing only happened in the movies, not small towns in Indiana. I did not, however, want to be friends with her. She was an embarrassment to be around. She had almost no friends left in town at that point. She called me up to tell me she had decided. She needed a change, and she was going to pursue a different career and move to Minneapolis to make that happen. She moved in 1998, and I honestly thought I would never see her again. I wish I hadn't. She called me about a year and a half later. She said she was doing really well, and that the move had been good for her. She said she had made friends, and she had met a boy and was completely in love. She said this was the guy she was going to marry. His name was Dan, and she told me that he was the guy that had gotten her interested in punk rock and heroin. I kind of paused when she said that. I wasn't any kind of angel in my 20s, but I never even dabbled in hard stuff like that, and it didn't sound very good. Hannah insisted it wasn't a habit. She said it was amazing and easy to control as long as you were careful. This was a complete change in lifestyle and scene. Before this, she had been something of a hippie chic, but that was all gone now. At that point, her life revolved around hair, punk rock, heroin, and Dan. She wanted to come back for a visit. We went to the mall and she stopped at a kiosk and said she wanted to buy a cell phone. She lived 8 hours away in a completely different state with a completely different area code. We got into a small argument about it. Back in 2000, cell phones were purchased and billed from your local area code, and you paid through the nose if you were roaming. Hannah said to just drop it because she had done her research and it would be fine. She bought the phone and listed her boyfriend Dan as the main user on the registration. She left, and I noticed she had left her curling iron behind, and I thought I would surprise her by calling her new cell phone. She had set it up at my house, and I got the number from the caller ID. No one picked up. Instead, it went to an answering machine for Dan, the same Dan that had been dating Kelly years earlier, and the same Dan that Hannah had been accused of being obsessed with. There was no doubt about who it was. I hung up, and I wondered why she had lied to me about who her boyfriend really was. A couple of minutes later, Hannah called me back on her original cell phone. She played it off as a coincidence that I had just called that other number. She said she had run into hometown Dan and his friends, and he had lost his phone, so Hannah had done him a favor and given him the one she had just purchased. I said how strange it was that she would buy a phone for her boyfriend Dan, only to run into someone else with the same name and give it away instead. Dan's real name is very common, probably one of the most common names for men of my generation, and Hannah joked about how many different people she knew with that same exact name. A couple of months later, she called. She wanted to visit again in the summer. No matter what she said about being in control of the heroin use, it was very obvious that it had become a full-fledged habit. Things had taken a turn in her life. Her boyfriend Dan had moved to Chicago. Hannah said that he was still in love with her and they were still together, but that something had happened with his ex-girlfriend, and they were taking a break and only seeing one another privately. Hannah said he was trying to protect her. According to Hannah, his ex-girlfriend had refused to accept their breakup and had been stalking Dan for months. It was one of the reasons he had moved. She had taken an overdose of heroin and had tried to commit suicide when she found out that Hannah and Dan were together. That was the reason that they had decided that they had to keep their relationship secret. That was why Hannah was really in town. He was going to be coming later to join her, and they had set up a get-together. I wanted to meet him, but Hannah said he wouldn't act like her boyfriend when other people were around. I started to question her. She got angry and said she wouldn't let me meet him because I wouldn't understand their relationship. We got into a fight. I ordered her out of my house and made it clear that I wanted nothing to do with her. Her mother called me about a year later. She said that Hannah was living with them in Atlanta because something very bad had happened in Minneapolis. Hannah didn't have any friends left. Her mother straight up begged me to please forgive so she could have someone to talk to. She said Hannah had spent 3 months in rehab and was off the heroin, but emotionally not doing well. She said she had to make a trip back to Minneapolis to take care of some things and pick up some of her stuff. Her mother was worried that being back there and around her old friends would trigger her to want to use again. She said it was very important that Hannah not relapse. If she did, the consequences would be severe. She wanted me to go with her. I said I would. Hannah wouldn't tell me what happened. She just said that someone had almost died and it had been an accident, but it had still been her fault. She drove into town to pick me up for our trip up to Minneapolis, but said we had to stop somewhere first. We went to the old bar downtown that we used to hang out in when she had lived in town. She said she had to meet someone. Some young woman walked in, and Hannah walked over to her and hugged her and started crying. She was apologizing all over the place and kept telling her she needed her to realize that it had been an accident. The woman said she forgave her, but that her life had been difficult since what happened, and she could not have anything to do with Hannah anymore and could no longer be friends with her. Hannah asked if she had ever spoken to her ex-boyfriend and had a chance to work things out with him. She said no, he was mad at her and he refused to talk to her. Hannah said he had a new cell phone and she gave her the number just in case she changed her mind and wanted to get a hold of him. She left. I was sitting there totally confused by what I had just witnessed. I was really uncomfortable with what I had heard. I asked Hannah if the ex-boyfriend she was talking about was Hometown Dan. She said no, someone else that I had never met. Hannah said she and her Dan had broken up because he was still using heroin, and she said it was too painful to talk about him. She said it was so painful that when we got to Minneapolis to please not bring him up. She said her friends knew not to mention him around her, and she asked me not to also. We got to Minneapolis, and the young woman we were staying with turned out to be one of Hannah's former roommates. That is when I found out what had really happened and what Hannah had been refusing to talk about. It turned out that girl from the bar had been the other roommate, the one that had almost died because of something that Hannah did. We settled in, and Hannah said that she could explain what happened a year ago. A year ago? That was the first time I realized that this had happened much longer in the past than I thought. The former roommate said that she was happy that Hannah was clean, but she needed her to explain why she had tried to kill the other girl. Those were her words. She wasn't calling it an accident. She said she was there, she saw it, and Hannah had done that to her on purpose and she wanted to know why. This is what she described. Hannah had a friend from Indiana that had broken up with her boyfriend Dan after Hannah had told her that she found out he was cheating on her and had gotten another woman pregnant. Hannah invited her to live with her up in Minneapolis to get away from him and start over. She had no idea that Hannah was a heroin user. She did not like Minneapolis. She had experienced a run of bad luck the couple of weeks she had been there, and even though Hannah kept trying to convince her to stick it out to see if she would like it, she had decided she was going to leave and go back home. She regretted her breakup with Dan. She wanted to talk to him and see if they could work through it. They had been together for almost 2 years. She was worried because she had lost touch with him. Hannah had been able to track down his phone number for her through some mutual friends, but no matter how many times she called or how much she begged, he refused to answer her calls or call her back when she left messages. She was upset and told Hannah that she was going to stop by his apartment to see him on her way back to Indiana. She was supposed to be leaving within a day. Hannah kept insisting that she would like heroin, if she would just try a little bit, and had been pressuring her very hard to join in with everyone else. The roommate was angry about that. She said Hannah knew she was scared and didn't even want to try it. Hannah had promised her that she would be safe, and promised her that it would be a small dose. Hannah said she knew what she was doing. She gave in. Hannah bought the heroin, and she bought a lot more than normal, which she said was for a party later. She prepared the needles and said she had just used a small amount. Instead, she had used all that she had bought, which turned out to be way more than was necessary to kill all of them. Hannah had given the girl the injection, and she slumped over immediately and stopped breathing. Hannah had then moved on to the other roommate and told her everything was fine in the other room and that she was enjoying herself. She tried to convince her to take her dose, but she wanted to check on the other girl first. Hannah walked over and had an imaginary conversation with the young woman who was completely unconscious and tried to convince the other roommate that she was fine. She went to check on her herself and immediately saw she wasn't even breathing. Panicked and started screaming at Hannah about why she was lying. She ran for the phone. Hannah ran after her. She dialed 911. Hannah grabbed the phone and hung it up. They called back and she said it had been a mistake and they were fine. Hannah wouldn't let her near the phone and kept trying to tell her that she was being hysterical and that everything was okay. Hannah tried to pin her down and force the needle on her, and she fought back and ran out of the apartment and down the hall to a neighbor's. They called 911. When the paramedics got there, the girl was clinically dead. They worked on her and got a heartbeat and transferred her to a local hospital in a comatose state. She lived, but for a while it wasn't clear if she would pull through. Hannah told the police she didn't know why she had done it. After talking with a lawyer, she said it was because of heroin psychosis and that she had been temporarily insane at the time. She agreed to a long-term rehab stay and a year of drug testing and probation. After that, the charges against her were dropped. That had been the reason that it was so important Hannah did not relapse. She would have been looking at prison time. Hannah said it had been a strange temporary hallucination that had caused her behavior and that she had never meant to hurt her, and the whole thing had been an accident and a misunderstanding. The same excuse she always used. I am going to spell this out. Since the morons who worked for the Minneapolis Police Department were too stupid to realize this 20 years ago. Hannah was obsessed with this girl's boyfriend Dan. She had been obsessed with him for years. She had developed a detailed and deranged fantasy that the two of them were in a secret relationship together because she has a peculiar and somewhat rare psychiatric condition called erotomania or de Clermont syndrome. She believed that this young woman was standing in the way of their romance, and so she ingratiated herself to her and pretended to be her friend, so that she could find a way to get close enough to her to get her out of the way. She successfully managed to spread rumors and interfere in their relationship enough that the two of them broke up. Then Hannah invited this young woman to Minneapolis to isolate her from her other friends and control what information she had access to. This was the year 2000. We didn't have text message or Facebook back then for keeping in touch with people. She lulled her into a false sense of friendship and security so she could manipulate her and get close enough to her to hurt her. When she realized she was still in love with Dan and wanted to talk to him, Hannah realized that she would eventually find out that the rumors she had been told were not true and that Hannah was the source. She purchased a cell phone in Indiana and made a recording of Dan's answering machine message so that she could impersonate him on the phone, and so the young woman would believe she was in contact with him. She never knew that Dan never received the messages. Hannah was using that to spy on her. When she said she was going to go back home and show up to see if Dan would talk to her in person, Hannah knew that meant she would find out she had given her a fake phone number and that she had gone to extreme lengths to prevent her from speaking to him, and it would have been obvious why. She tried to talk her into trying heroin because she planned on killing her and her other roommate, because that would be a good way to make it appear to be an accident. Hannah was about to have her obsessions with Dan, her delusional beliefs about him, and her bizarre mental disorder exposed, and she knew that. She knew for at least a day or more before the incident, which is why it is clear that her actions were premeditated, because her motive was. All of this would have been remarkably easy to figure out if the police had contacted Dan and if they had taken a look at Hannah's phone records. Phone harassment has always been her favorite hobby. Instead, they treated it just like the other 999 overdoses they have to respond to every month, and gave Hannah the old rehab or prison option. Since her family could afford a lawyer and a 3-month rehab stay, that was the option she took. The police never investigated her for anything, never contacted the man Dan at the center of this, and never took any serious look into her background. It wasn't an accident. It was an attempted murder, and a pretty easy one to prove at that. Instead, the police totally dropped the ball, and because of their incompetence, she was allowed to completely get away with it. By the way, just in case any idiots who work for the Minneapolis Police Department ever read this, There is no statute of limitations on first-degree attempted murder. At the time, I didn't know any of this. I was trying to act as a support system for a former friend who was suicidal on the cusp of a heroin relapse. I was suspicious, but anytime I asked Hannah questions, she just said it was too painful to talk about or would guilt-trip me about not respecting her boundaries. She had sworn to me that this young woman had never been in any relationship with the Dan from our hometown that she had known years earlier. I returned to Indiana, and Hannah returned to her parents in Atlanta, and I didn't talk to her for a while. She called later and wanted to visit her old hometown again. Once again, I let her stay with me. We ran into Dan. He had moved to Chicago, but just happened to be back in town that weekend. I hadn't seen him in years. Hannah had contacted him to get together. She spent the whole afternoon trying to pull him aside to talk to him, but instead he made it clear that he had only shown up because he wanted to see me. He had broken up with Kelly years earlier, but I thought he had a long-term girlfriend since then. Dan said she had left him a year ago and just disappeared. He had called her repeatedly, but she had completely cut him off. He was nice to me, he was handsome, he was a lot of fun to be around, and he asked me out. We made plans to meet up the next day. I saw him at a bar, and he turned around and walked out the door and wouldn't even look at me. I was upset and confused. Hannah was super sympathetic and said he had this weird thing with lying to girls and playing with their emotions by pretending to like them. It wasn't like I had never been lied to by a boy before, but this felt strange. A week later, my student loan came through, and I decided to go back to college and finish my degree. I moved a couple hours away. The first person that called me was Hannah. Once again, she wanted to come visit me. She insisted that she had gone out and got me a surprise, and she needed to give it to me in person. She said she had something really important to talk to me about, and she said that it would sound weird, but she asked me to promise her that I wouldn't tell anyone she was coming to see me. I humored her. She showed up at my apartment, and when she walked in, the first thing she asked me was if I had told anyone she would be there. At first I said no. She said that she had something for me and reached into her purse. She paused and said that she just wanted to make sure that no one knew she was there. I was frustrated, and I kind of offhand said that no one besides my mom and best friend. Hannah got furious. She was angry that I had told anyone she would be there and refused to show me what she had brought as a surprise for me. She went and locked it in her glove compartment because she said she didn't want me to snoop in her stuff and find it. She kept saying she wanted to talk about something, but the time wasn't right. She decided to go home a day early. Then one day, a couple of weeks later, out of the blue, she just showed up on my doorstep one evening. I was on the phone with my best friend, who, by the way, went to the same Catholic high school as Hannah, and while not close friends with her, knew who she was. I was talking to her when I saw Hannah walk up to my front door. It was an 8-hour drive from Atlanta to Indiana. I got up and opened the door, and I still had the phone up to my ear. When I opened it, Hannah had her head down, and she had one hand inside her purse. I said her name, and she looked up at me and pulled something purple from her purse. She saw I was on the phone and swiveled around and put whatever she had been holding in her hand back in her bag. She was acting very strange, and she was shaking, and I was worried. I asked her to come inside. At that point, I was convinced that she was back on heroin, and that had been the secret she'd been trying to talk to me about for months. She said that she was upset about a boy and needed to talk to me. She said she had something that she wanted to show me, and she reached into her purse and pulled out a handgun. It was a purple and black revolver, and I realized from the color that it was what she had pulled from her purse when I had first answered the door. She said that she had been checking to make sure the safety was on, and I was lucky that she hadn't accidentally shot me because I had startled her. She said the gun was because she was back on heroin and scared of the part of town she had to go to in order to buy it. I didn't know it back then, but revolvers don't have safeties. She told me about a musician in Atlanta that she had met, and she was frustrated because he had a girlfriend, and she hadn't been able to find a way to get him to pay attention to her. She wanted me to tell her what I had done to Dan so she could use it on this guy. She told me he was still talking about me months later, and she wanted to know why he was still interested even though we hadn't talked since the previous summer. From my point of view, he wasn't. He had ghosted me months earlier. Hannah kept insisting that I must have done something to him. It was like she was implying that I had hypnotized him or something ludicrous, and she wanted me to tell her. I clearly explained that I hadn't done anything and he had ignored me, and then never returned my phone calls after I tried calling him. She cried and drank for a couple of hours and then turned around and drove 8 hours back to Atlanta in the middle of the night. Just for the record, Hannah was the one who gave me Dan's phone number. After this, something very strange seemed to get set into motion. I got a phone call from an anonymous number, and when I answered, it was Hannah, who said someone wanted to talk to me, and she flipped me over to a three-way call with someone else. It was Dan's roommate and best friend in Chicago, and he started screaming at me, asking me why I was playing games with Dan and messing with him. He said he was going out of his mind and I needed to call him back and stop whatever it was that I had been doing to him. I told him I didn't know what he was talking about. Dan had never called me, and I had tried to call him, and then we were disconnected. Afterwards, I received another anonymous call. It was Hannah with another three-way call and another group of boys who started yelling at me, telling me they would kill me for what I had done to Dan. Then another disconnected line before I could ask them what they were talking about. Then I called Hannah to find out what the hell was going on. It was the craziest and most disturbing conversation I have ever had with another person. At first, she just kept saying that I had hurt Dan, and I could not ever talk to him again, or have any contact with him. None of it made any sense, since this was about a guy that had refused to return my phone calls and had ignored me for months. Hannah started getting very upset and kept saying that I knew what I had done, I just wouldn't admit it. She said that Dan hated me and had never wanted anything to do with me, but that I was doing things to him to make him say that and pretend that he liked me instead of her. I had no idea what the hell was going on. She said that Dan was her secret boyfriend and that he was in love with her and had been in love with her for years. She said that the two of them had been together since they were teenagers and that I knew it but was pretending not to. I asked her how she could have been his girlfriend when I knew of others girls he had dated. She started screeching that those weren't real relationships. He was only pretending to like them. When he talked about them, he was really talking about her, but other people kept doing things to him so that he couldn't tell her directly how he felt. But she knew. She insisted that he found ways to let her know that he was really thinking about her. She said that all of his friends respected their privacy, which was why they would play along when he pretended he was dating other people. She kept insisting he was in love with her and no one else. She said she was sick of people pretending to be her friend and then stabbing her in the back by going after her boyfriend, and she said she would not put up with anyone coming between them, and she would not let anyone hurt him. She said I was forcing him to forget how he really felt, and that it had hurt him not to be with her, and she wouldn't let me hurt him. I realized that she wasn't making any sense and that she was totally psychotic. I told her to never contact me again, and I hung up. All I could think about was how she had pulled a gun out of her purse the last time she had shown up at my apartment by surprise. She had given a fatal overdose of heroin to another woman, and had been accused by another of luring them to a ledge and trying to push her off. The one thing we all had in common was Dan. I called the number I had for Dan. It was disconnected. I thought about that weird situation with the cell phone she had purchased a couple of years earlier. I found that old number in my address book and called it, except this time it wasn't Dan's voice on the answering machine, it was mine. The psycho bitch had made a recording of my voicemail and had put it on a cell phone that she owned, and once I discovered that, pretty much everything fell very clearly into place. That was what had happened to that girl in Minneapolis, and that was why Dan had spent the last several months thinking he was contacting me. There was no relationship with Dan. It was all in Hannah's head. She was frantically trying to keep other women away from him, to protect her fantasy from imploding. Hannah is psychotic. It is a mental disorder called erotomania, and it is the fixed delusional belief that another person is secretly in love with you. Not everyone who has it will be violent, but some people are. In some cases, other people are used in strange psychotic dramas and vicious smear campaigns that are aimed at trying to rearrange reality so that it conforms with the delusions inside of their head. The people that are perceived as standing in their way can be the victims of extreme violence. Hannah showed up the next day at my apartment screaming at me to let her in. I would not, and I was getting ready to call the police when she started crying and saying that Dan had killed himself, and then she walked away, and that was the last time I ever saw her. I spoke to my parents, who told me that I had received several phone calls to their house from people letting me know the same thing. I changed my phone number to keep her from contacting me. I contacted the police in Indiana, who said if she showed up again that they could arrest her for felony intimidation, but not for anything she had done months earlier. I contacted the police in Minneapolis, but I knew very little information, only Hannah's name, not where or when it had happened. I asked repeatedly to please be allowed to speak to someone, but the woman on the phone said they weren't interested in talking to me. I moved so she wouldn't know where I lived. I cut myself off from anyone from my hometown who I thought might know her, so nothing could ever get back to her about where I lived. The last I heard from her, she was stalking some new guy down in Atlanta. I would have been more than happy to meet the bitch in a courtroom, but unfortunately the law is nothing like you see on TV. So unless I ever have the privilege of sitting in on her sentencing hearing, Hannah from Indiana, let's not meet again. That concludes today's appointment at Project Scarborough. Have any stories you want me to cover? Feel free to comment them below or message me on TikTok at Project Scarborough.
Until next time.